I now want to talk to you about the sculpture at Chartres. There's a lot of sculpture at Chartres. We're not going to try to talk about it all. I'm going to be using selected examples, emphasizing the central portal on the west side, and then showing a few examples from the other portals or transept entrances. What we're looking at here are the three portals that are on the west side, the main entrance to Chartres Cathedral. And the dates that your book gives you are for the erection of the facade. So these are probably going to be, they're at the bottom. Presumably they're a little closer to the earlier part of this, to about the mid-century. And they're very interesting images, so we want to take a look at them and talk about them. You might notice the central tympana is largest. The two tympana on the side are smaller. The tympana, I think we've talked about this with Romanesque art, but the tympana is the area inside the arch. It's above the doorway, and then you have this arch, and then you have the sculpted area within it. In this case, it's a slightly pointed arch, which we saw at with Giselbertus's Last Judgment at Autun, and of course, even more so now that we have a Gothic cathedral, the point is a bit more prominent, and it will get even more so with the later churches. So this is our mid-12th century sculpture, the early Gothic period. Also, I should mention that the churches have door jambs. And jambs are just the vertical members. In these cases, they're usually columns that are adjacent to the door on either side. And as you can see, they really give it a very three-dimensional appearance, because it's not just a flat door. It really has dimension and volume with all of these jambs that lead up to the door. Generally, the jambs are carved, and the images that we're going to be looking at, they're carved with figures. And you can see here that the figures are very cylindrical, like the columns on which they are mounted, and that will be one of the points we'll be making as we look at some more examples. In fact, here we are, looking at more examples. One of the features that you will find out if you compare Gothic sculpture with Romanesque sculpture, and thinking of things like Vézelay, Autun, Giselbertus's sculpture, or Gualdinus's, but particularly thinking of that Burgundian sculpture. And then you go and you look at the Gothic sculpture, and it's starting to become more naturalistic. And that continues all the way through the Gothic. This is just the beginning, so there's still a lot of transitional features. This is not fully developed. This is just the very beginning, just the start of the Gothic. And then as time progresses, say in the 13th century, you get these very elegant Gothic Madonnas. And other saints and other figures. And eventually, even in Germany, you get extremely emotional and exaggerated forms, which are just these wonderfully emotive, they call them Andachtbilder, pictures to meditate on. And are supposed to elicit very, very strong emotion and devotion, or devotional images. This isn't that. I'm just sort of mentioning the future because we have limited time. What we're looking at right now is the very beginning of the Gothic period. And so there's just a few things that look a bit more naturalistic. Obviously, these sculptures are still dependent, subservient to the architecture, if you will. They're shaped like the shape of the architecture, and that's a Romanesque characteristic. But there's a few things that say, wait, we're changing, we're becoming more naturalistic. If you look at the face, look at some of the details of the faces, and you'll notice things like cheekbones. And although the hair is parallel grooves, it seems to be less fanciful decoration with little curly cues, and perhaps a bit more realistic imagery there. The way the faces are modeled give you a greater feeling of realism. And even when you're looking at the drapery folds, which obviously some of them seem to be just wrapping these very, very thin figures, or our lovely lady there has these vertical image that just really, the vertical grooves that just really enhance the feeling of this tall, thin figure. But take a look at the shoulder of this particular figure that I've got the detail of. There's a place where the drapery seems to bunch together and then come out. And that's even more prominent here if you look at this king, and that's what, well, I'll get the iconography in a minute. But if you look at the garment that he's wearing, of course it has all of that decoration, but you might notice that it's kind of bunched and then it comes out. It hangs, I want to say. Of course it's stone, but that's the appearance. So it's hanging. So the drapery folds are becoming more natural. They're not there yet, but it's a step in that direction. And I think you can take a look at this face and see also that this is more realistic than, say, the face of Christ at Tun or Burgundy. Now, the iconography of this has, people have said different things over the years. It used to be thought, they used to say they saw the crowns on some of these figures' heads, and they thought, maybe these are, kings and queens of France. But I think most people are agreed that these are Old Testament figures, including the kings and queens of the Old Testament. And you have people, of course, like David, Solomon, who would be wearing crowns. And they may very well be the ancestors of Christ. Christ was supposed to descend from David. And so this is sort of the Old Testament predecessors of Christ, who, of course, is up in the tympanum above, connecting the Old Testament and the New.